Yes, the recording has begun.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Today's Thursday, June 6th, and my name is Kwame Afray, and I'm the chair for the land use committee, and I call this meeting to order. Excellent. Make this a lot easier later on. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I'm just going to come out in the beginning and say that we know that the focus of this meeting will be to give extended time for the city of Yes, CHO, or housing opportunity. As you know, we had a little bit of restricted time at the general board meeting as we tried to make that a meeting for all business. But this meeting is dedicated specifically to have that conversation or that extended conversation. And we'll get to that a little bit later on, but not too long. The approval of the meeting minutes, I'll move to the latter end of the meeting, just in the interest and respect for everybody's time here. And I'll move into the chairperson's report, which will also be brief, as there hasn't been many events since the end of the general board meeting. As far as the SCRC, which is our Shirley Chisholm Recreation Center, on May 24th, they held the topping off ceremony. For anyone that's not familiar with construction, that ceremony signifies that the last beam was installed, and it's usually commemorated by a flag, the American flag being hung. So if you're driving by the Chisholm Center, you see the American flag being hung, that means that that's the highest elevation that the building will be risen to. And the final infrastructure beam was installed, is usually signed by the people who are part of the installation, and that just gives us a little insight of how the project is moving along. Everyone knows that the survey for the CHO did go out along with this meeting. Very happy with the engagement so far. There's been a lot for me to dive into, a lot for me to cipher through information wise. And for context, the survey will be used to color ultimately the board's decision on June 18th. And I want everybody to know that our meeting won't be on the third Wednesday of the month as typical, as that falls on Juneteenth. It will be held on June 18th, the day before. We will be voting as a board on the official stance against or for the city of Yes CHO. In other news, I just wanted to bring to everybody's attention, if you weren't aware, that the congestion pricing plan that was supposed to go in place on June 30th will not be happening. It's suspended indefinitely. And our governor announced that yesterday, citing that she didn't want to put any more burden on any more New Yorkers in this time frame. We're not sure if that's the true reason for it. We didn't really get any details extending it further, but I'm sure everybody's happy that we don't have to pay more to go to a borough that we're attached to via Free Bridge. And it was actually reported today, meaning that we're speaking today on City of Yes business. I believe the city council voted the City of Yes economic opportunity and approved it today. I think about 3 hours ago. It did tweak some things within it. I'll get those details out to people that are interested. But the most significant thing that was tweaked was the bodegas in the middle of, or the corner stores, excuse me, in the middle of residential districts. I believe that aspect of it was removed. And that's all that I have from that actual report that was given to me. That ends my chairperson's report. And at this time, I open the floor for any questions for anybody has pertaining to the report and the report only. Any questions?
Yes. Are we going to get a copy of that report?
My report?
No, from the city council.
You mean as far as who are the voters and stuff like that?
Yes, and what all the tweaks are going to do.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll get an official, I guess, a memorandum at some point that galvanizes tells us everything that was changed. It was put out publicly, but the final version of it we'll definitely get, along with the vote counts and everything else that happened.
But that's what I want to see, the final vote counts and who's going to vote against the populace.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions? Cooperation. Excellent. So that concludes the chairperson's report. And at this time, I'm going to pass the floor to our presenters. They have done this presentation multiple times. I know that they're patient and that they'll engage and give us everything that we need. I do ask that you do hold your questions to the end of the presentation, just to give them the opportunity to speak on its points at every aspect. As you know, we are dedicating tonight to have that conversation and to make anything that is unclear as clear as possible. Pertaining to the city of Yes Housing Opportunity. All right. And another thing that I want to make point of as I'm reviewing the survey, we need to be clear that we are voting on the plan as it is, right? This isn't a time for, not to say that it can't be modified, because clearly we've seen it was modified by city council. Our ultimate position will be colored by our survey that we're taking, that will go in combined with our ultimate vote that goes out as our represented position on the city of Yes. But your opinions should be based on the information that's in front of you, right? Not what you'd like it to be, right? It needs to be judged, and your vote and the weight of your vote needs to tip the scales on where you would and on how you feel on the 10 points that we'll be discussing tonight. Go with that?
Understood.
Excellent. Mr. Wiseglass, Ms. Rosenfeld? Anybody?
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
I can.
Great. So again, my name is Ina Gusenfeld. I'm a senior planner at the Brooklyn office of the Department of City Planning, and I'm also the DCP liaison to Brooklyn Community Board 17, which is why you've seen and heard so much of me in connection with City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. I'm joined tonight by my colleagues, David Weisglass, who you've also heard from the Brooklyn office, and my colleague Talia Kollrick from the zoning division to answer a variety of questions that may come up. Before we get started, I do want to ask if you would like to see the full presentation, if there's time for us to provide the same kind of extensive overview that we did at our first land use committee meeting on May 2nd, or if there are particular proposals that you want us to focus on within the presentation.
I'll speak to that. It is concentrated to the 10 points that directly affects us, but you know, if you have a more informed or a much more illustrated version of the presentation, you know, people are here tonight to have that conversation. So I don't want to minimize anything that you guys have. Any bits of information you feel, I would go with the extended. And I'll let you know if we're exceeding. Hopefully we're good on time. I feel like we are so far. And everyone's here to have this conversation. So feel free to move forward with the full presentation. And that's it.
Okay, great. And then we'll be able to return to any particular slides related to questions that come up. All right, so I'm going to start sharing. Okay, can you please confirm that you're able to see my screen?
I can. Could you go full screen?
One moment, let me try. Let me unshare and then try to share a full screen version. One moment, please. All right. One moment. We're going to give this a try and see if this works. Okay, does it look full screen now or still in the window?
It still looks in the window, but I guess we'll get the point.
Okay, let me try it. Let me try it this way, and that way I can refer to particular slides as needed. All right, good evening. Thank you for having us again to present City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, or CHO, a citywide text amendment that will encourage equitable housing development over a wide geography. CHO is the biggest pro-housing change that the Department of City Planning has ever undertaken and would affect zoning in every part of our city. As stated here, the goal is to enable a little more housing in every neighborhood by removing zoning barriers to growth. This is that New York City actually hasn't built enough housing to keep up with demand in recent decades. Most of our current housing stock was created in the first half of the 20th century, and since then, production has fallen dramatically. And part of that is because zoning, the current zoning, which was adopted in 1961, has become increasingly restrictive in recent decades as demand for housing has grown and remains unmet across New York City. There has been some housing production recently, both higher and lower density, but it has been limited to a few
I
neighborhoods.
think that your slides are changing. We're not seeing the slides move. I don't know if you're speaking
Can you-
or speaking against slides. It's still showing the first slide for us.
Okay. Give me one moment.
Okay.
Are you able to see the slide now?
Yes.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Okay, this is slide 4. I apologize for the technical issues. Okay, great. So this is visible, yes? Yes, okay. So a big reason why we have this housing shortage is that we're simply not building enough housing to meet New Yorkers' needs at a time when our population is high and supply is low, and a lot of our housing stock is aging amid restrictive zoning. Okay. As I mentioned, there has been some recent housing production, but it's been concentrated in just a few neighborhoods. Last year, 10 community districts, shown here in navy, produced as much housing as the other 49 combined. And the problem is that when some neighborhoods stop producing housing, that naturally puts pressure on other neighborhoods to absorb more and more new development. So that's what we mean by creating an equitable housing framework, by encouraging housing production in every community district. Right. The proposals in City of Yes for Housing Opportunity emerge from goals outlined in Where We Live NYC, the city's fair housing plan, which was created by HPD in collaboration with over 250 community organizations. Where We Live highlights how the city's housing shortage and affordability crisis have severely limited New Yorkers' housing choices, thereby exacerbating neighborhood-based legacies of segregation, discrimination, and concentrated poverty in today's unequal city. I want to focus on one statistic in particular. So currently, the average working family would have to spend about half of their pre-tax income on rent to afford the average 2-bedroom unit. And rent burdens are similarly stark for a variety of individuals and families looking for housing in New York City. Okay. New York City's housing crisis and its economy are deeply intertwined. Housing production is an important source of jobs for local residents, whether temporary jobs in construction or more permanent jobs in building maintenance. Now, the Department of City Planning recognizes that there's a variety of reasons for our housing shortage, and that there are also compounding issues such as aging infrastructure that are of great concern to residents across the city and in CB 17. As the Department of City Planning, we have one particular tool to address New York's housing shortage, and that is zoning. Zoning regulates density and use of what can be built, but there's a lot that we don't control, including funding or building new housing. And we understand that in order to, I'm sorry, is there a question? Okay, I'll keep going. And we recognize that in order to create the kind of housing and income restricted housing that New York City needs, zoning has to work hand in hand with subsidies, tax incentives, tenant protections, and variety of supportive models for different types of housing. Okay. So what are we doing to address the housing crisis with zoning at the Department of City Planning? We are looking to change our zoning to respond to these issues by increasing the amount and type of housing in every neighborhood across the city. And if each neighborhood adds a little more housing, then New York City can add a lot more housing overall without inducing dramatic change or overtaxing infrastructure in any one neighborhood. So I'm going to start by reviewing a number of our proposals, and I'm going to go through these kind of a little bit slower so that there's an opportunity to understand and formulate questions for discussion. So what it takes to add housing in every neighborhood is a wide variety of strategies that address barriers to housing production, including income-restricted housing. So to that end, CHO combines a number of proposals looking at low-density areas where we would seek to enable more so-called missing middle housing or low-rise apartment buildings where appropriate. And for small buildings, CHO would allow homeowners to add ADUs, accessory dwelling units, and provide flexibility to modify their buildings. In medium and high density districts, a new tool called Universal Affordability Preference, or UAP, would allow bigger buildings, but specifically for the provision of affordable housing. And then across the city, CHO would remove residential parking mandates, though not prohibit provision of accessory parking, which are proven to increase construction costs. And there are other smaller proposals to enable conversion of non-residential buildings, allow more small and shared apartments, and permit residential campuses to add height-limited buildings. All right. So what is missing middle housing? Missing middle housing includes modestly scaled residential buildings that are often affordable to middle income residents. And they're called missing because this once common housing type is not often built today. And that's because of restrictive zoning. So small apartment buildings, 2 to 3 family homes, like the ones shown in this slide, again, built in the first half of the 20th century, very common across the city's lower density neighborhoods, and were allowed until the early 2000s, but now are restricted or prohibited by exclusionary zoning. So in the spirit of producing a little more housing in every neighborhood, CHO would reintroduce these modest buildings that are typically more affordable than other housing types, and small apartment buildings that can benefit from some of the existing affordability programs geared toward buildings with fewer units. And you can see here where this particular proposal would apply across CD17. Our town center proposal would revive another classic building type. So here we're still talking about small apartment buildings, but in this case, mixed use buildings with ground floor commercial uses that you'll see in low density commercial corridors all across the city. And just as with missing middle housing, unfortunately, overly restrictive zoning makes it impossible to build such buildings today. So you can see in this schematic on the left, there's a one-story commercial building, but you can't build housing on top of it under today's zoning. So this proposal would streamline zoning rules, including restrictions on floor area and height, so that it's again feasible to build 2 to 4 stories of housing above a commercial ground floor. And here you can see the particular commercial corridors where town center zoning could be implemented under CHO. So you're looking at new buildings with 2 to 4 stories of residential above, with commercial, typically retail on the ground floor, that would mirror existing buildings that were built many decades ago. All right. Our next proposal, Transit-Oriented Development, or TOD, would allow low-rise buildings on sites near transit that are over 5,000 square feet, on the short end of a block, or facing a street over 75 feet wide. And I want to stress that we're still talking about lower density proposals here because these buildings would be 3 to 5 stories. So by adding modest buildings in areas with good transit access, transit-oriented development would enable missing middle housing while also promoting environmental sustainability, reducing the need for parking, and bringing more housing closer proximity to transit access. Okay, and here you can see areas where this proposal would apply within CD17. So here I have a rendering showing an example of a transit-oriented development in a 2-family district. You can see this site qualifies for TOD because it's over 5,000 square feet. It is in this case within half a mile of a subway or rail station, and it is on the wide street or short end of the block. In this case, it's on a corner. And so under TOD, what you get is a 4-story building with 18 apartments. And this again would mirror an existing housing type. There are many apartment buildings like this that already are built in lower density areas near transit. Importantly, these regulations could also be used by community facilities like faith-based organizations or libraries that would like to build housing on top or have transit-oriented development if their sites meet the criteria. So my next set of slides will focus on proposals affecting homeowners. And so we've discussed these in previous meetings. So again, I'm going to go through these a little bit more slowly and make sure that you're able to see all the renderings. So our first proposal affecting homeowners would be ADU. So accessory dwelling units, which provide important housing options for small households with a variety of needs, would be allowed for 1 and 2 family homes across the city. Because of their small size, this particular housing type serves different income levels than a large single family home. And they come in a variety of types, including backyard cottages, converted garages, and basement apartments. And I want to stress that I know there are concerns about basement ADUs. So that's kind of a separate issue here. There are existing basement ADUs that would have to be legalized, but that's not just a matter of zoning, and it would require changes to other state and local laws. Now, the reason that we're including this proposal is because we've seen that it can be successful in other places, like the state of Connecticut. And they can be important for families and middle-class homeowners. So there's a mutual benefit there of both lower housing costs and the ability to defray housing expenses. So here you see a variety of ADUs, detached, attached, basement, or attic. And so the new rules are designed to make it easier to convert existing spaces and to add a variety of these types. Okay. And all of these ADUs would have to comply with building code regulations. The same rule changes that enable ADUs can also help homeowners who need more flexibility to adapt or renovate their homes. So one thing we found as a byproduct of restrictive zoning is that many existing two-family homes in very low density districts are actually out of compliance. They're not in line with today's rules. They might have more square footage than's currently allowed, or their rear yards are too small. And that means that homeowners struggle to get mortgages to make alterations to their homes. So this proposal would fix these rules by relaxing or reducing certain restrictions, like, for example, side yards. It would also make sure that zoning matches what's actually on the ground instead of holding homeowners whose houses are non-compliant to existing restrictive zoning. The next proposal I want to look at, this is targeting medium and high density areas. And this is where City of Yes for Housing Opportunity would introduce UAP, or Universal Affordability Preference. So under UAP, new apartment buildings could be at least 20% larger, but the added floor area must be fully dedicated to permanently income restricted housing. This is not a new idea. It's modeled after existing rules that allow bigger building for affordable senior housing in some neighborhoods. So if you've heard of AIRS, Affordable Income Restricted Senior Housing Units, this is building off of that existing program. These rules would also ensure that zoning provides room to build extra affordable housing that would be required through this program. So there would be limited height increases to make room for these affordable units where necessary. Okay, and here you could see the higher density areas of CD17 where UAP would be applicable. Now, I know that there has been some skepticism across the city about affordable housing, affordable for whom, what does it mean if a unit is income restricted? And general concerns about the gap between, what's built as affordable and the actual affordability needs of many of the city's low and moderate income residents. So UAP is designed to serve lower income New Yorkers through its deeper affordability requirement and the introduction of income averaging. These are both policies that have long been advocated by the city's housing organizations. So the affordability requirement for UAP would be 60% of area median income, or $76,260 for a family of three. Now let me show you how that would work. So with income averaging, you would have the ability to achieve more units at 60% AMI that would be affordable for that family of three by combining units at 30% AMI, 60% AMI, 90% AMI within one building. And that's what's really revolutionary about UAP. Because currently we have a program called Voluntary Inclusionary Housing, or VIH, which stipulates that income restricted units in a VIH building must be targeted to 80% AMI. and it does not allow income averaging. So with UAP, we're achieving both deeper affordability and a better way to provide those affordable units through income averaging. Okay. So here's a rendering of how UAP would play out. Without UAP, a building is built according to the base floor area ratio for market rate housing. And so what you get is an 8-story market rate apartment building. But with UAP, the building would be about 20% bigger, which in this example translates to an additional 2 stories. But that means that 20% of the building, and those units are usually dispersed throughout the building, would be permanently income restricted housing. UAP is an evolution in the city's thinking about income restricted housing. It is probably the best, one of the best policies that we've come up with since voluntary inclusionary housing, mandatory inclusionary housing, and now UAP. And if it had been in place a decade ago, an additional 20,000 income restricted affordable units could have been created, which is enough to house 50,000 New Yorkers. So think about all the 8-story market rate buildings across the city today that could have been mandated to provide income restricted housing if we'd had this policy 10 years ago. Okay. And UAP can also be helpful for faith-based organizations that are looking to build 100% affordable housing. So for example, if a church in an R6 district, which is mapped extensively throughout Brooklyn, wants to partner with the developer to rebuild the church and put housing on top, UAP would provide a little bit more floor area ratio, FAR, and allow the site to achieve to 10 to 12 more income restricted units through this development. And so that may not sound like a lot, but if you add it up across the city, it starts to make a real difference. Mandatory inclusionary housing is not going away, but it is again being updated also to better serve low and moderate income New Yorkers. So MIH would remain in place. It would be mapped where there are significant increases in residential density. But now it would be more compatible with tools to facilitate affordable home ownership. And the MIH option 3, which is the deep affordability option, it would be now applied as a standalone option if deemed necessary by City Council. Okay, so finally, I'm going to present our parking proposals. So today, the New York City zoning resolution, which again dates back to 1961, requires new housing developments to include off-street parking, even when it's not needed. So we have examples of some developments that are right next door to an elevated train, but they must provide parking for 50% of their market rate units. And that means that there's less space for housing in those buildings, and it also increased construction costs, which means higher rents. So CHO would make parking optional for new housing everywhere, following the example of many other major cities. Okay, so optional. So the goal is to end parking mandates, but we are not prohibiting parking outright. So we have this rendering here showing how 2 cars take up about the same amount of space as a studio apartment. So our goal is to remove parking mandates to reduce the cost, both the cost of housing construction and enable the development of more homes in each building, be they studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, or other types of apartments. Okay. So here's an example, again, looking at a lower scale building. So even lower density buildings are bound by parking requirements. So here, if a developer wants to build a 16-unit apartment building within a 4-minute walk from the nearest subway station, that developer might stop at 10 units to avoid triggering a parking requirement. But without a parking mandate, they can build 16 units. So you get 6 more apartments to house individuals or families near transit that can take them to their jobs and their school and other destinations. So some additional changes to the parking rules would mean that mandates are lifted for houses of worship, for community facilities with sleeping accommodations like adult daycares, and for non-residential portions of some mixed-use developments. Removing existing parking can also happen, but that would require CPC authorization, except for 1 and 2 family homes. There are certain floor area exemptions in the zoning resolution related to parking that would be simplified. There would be greater flexibility for public use of accessory parking. A lot of accessory parking that's built in new developments today actually goes unused because it presents an additional cost for renters on top of market rate rent. And again, just cleaning up some regulations in certain districts. I want to emphasize that this proposal would not affect on-street parking regulations in any way. This is only accessory off-street parking. It would not change off-street parking for purely commercial or industrial buildings. This is the focus here again is housing. It would not impose any new parking maximums. And conversely, it would not restrict the amount of parking that can be built. So developers could still provide parking voluntarily as they do today, and that amount can go beyond what has been stated in the zoning resolution. No parking would automatically be removed within any developments. And again, no one would be forced to build housing without any parking at all. There are some additional changes, some things you've heard about, for example, that there are a lot of underused commercial buildings across the city that people would like to see converted to housing as a potential resource. So CHO aims to make that easier. Bringing another housing type back, that's small and shared apartments. Which would relieve pressure on older family size units that maybe currently are rented by 4 roommates but are needed for a family, and also eliminate barriers to infill where it makes sense, so that you could have more housing built between buildings, again, where it makes sense. Okay. The last thing that I want to talk about is the creation of new medium and high density zoning districts that would be applicable citywide. It is true that the zoning resolution, if CHO is approved, would incorporate new zoning districts above 12 FAR. It would also provide more flexibility to map new lower density zoning districts, such as this R6-2 and R6D, to fill in the gaps in the range of zoning districts and facilitate better development. But with any of these districts, whether R6-2 or R12, these would not be mapped automatically. They would require a separate, typically private ULURP action. And as a reminder, CHO is a zoning text amendment. So while we would be amending the text of the zoning resolution, we would not be changing the existing zoning anywhere in the city. All right, so I have a summary here again of coming back to the idea of creating a little more housing in every neighborhood and more housing types for New Yorkers. So these proposals that I've discussed, some targeting lower density districts, some targeting higher ones, some looking at renters, some looking at homeowners, are designed as a suite to address the city's housing crisis and promote sustainability in new development. Okay. So I hope you've had a chance to peruse our Housing Opportunity website. We're constantly updating with new materials, including renderings of these different proposals. We have the annotated zoning text. We have recordings of previous information sessions. And we're happy, again, to always provide more information in writing in response to specific questions. So that's my presentation for you today. Thank you for your time. And together, the three of us, myself, David, and Talia, will now take your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gusenfeld and DCP team. As we move into the question section, to try to give order and to try to give every topic the opportunity. I'm not expecting everybody to know exactly where their question landed, but I do want to go through the topics and give them the opportunity for those questions to be asked, and hopefully we can organize it, because I know that there's going to be more conversations on specific topics than others, right? And I'd like to start the questioning around the first topic, which is the town-centered zoning. Do we have any questions specifically on town-centered zoning from anyone in the chat? Anyone inside of the room virtually? You can raise your hand or unmute yourself if you have any questions pertaining to town-centered zoning. Anyone? Ms. Bennett, you're acknowledged. Just say your name and ask your question.
Adele Bennett, committee member. In the town center zoning, exactly how high are the buildings going to be that you are proposing? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. The question is how high the buildings are going to be.
Yes, exactly. How many floors?
I think it's 2 to 4 stories, but they could, anybody from DCP?
Sure, I can get this one.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Talia. I'm with the zoning division. In the areas that are zoned R4 and R5, in the R4 zones, the maximum height would be 45 feet, and in the R5 zones, the maximum height would be 55 feet. Both of these would just be 1 story higher than what would be allowed already.
And does that include a setback also?
That includes setback, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Next question or next hand that I see is Fatima.
Yes, hello, good evening, everyone. My question is just regarding the 2 to 4 floors. I'm sorry, my name is Fatima. I'm a community board member. My question is regarding the 2 to 4 floors that are supposed to be residential. Does that mean that it's going to be solely residential on those floors, or will there be a possibility that there will be businesses on those floors as well?
I can take this one again. In the town center zoning, it would be solely residential, but if the area is in a commercial overlay, then it would, typically there would just be 1 FAR of commercial allowed, either 1 or 2 stories, depending on if it's a C1 or C2 overlay district. But in the areas, in the qualifying sites, in the town center, the higher stories would be residential.
Does that answer your question, Fatima?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Quashi?
Yes, in the 4-story buildings, will any of them have elevators?
I think you are required to have an elevator if you have 5 stories, but someone may very well still build an elevator in a 4-story building. If anybody else has a clearer answer to this, that'd be great.
No, yeah, that's about it. I want to reiterate again, this is not building anything. So this is a proposal about the rules that a private property owner may utilize if that private property owner would like to construct a building. So if it has an elevator or not is generally up to that developer, or up to that builder or property owner, just like other, decisions are. But of course, that builder would need to comply with all, building codes, ADA accessibility codes, federal laws, like all that kind of stuff. So if an elevator is required for the builder to build, then they'll need to find a way to do it. And if it's not required by any other law, then they may or may not do it, just like any other choice that the builder has.
Because you did mention that some of the building codes are outdated, so they would have to comply with the new building codes, correct?
They would need to comply with whatever applicable building codes there are. So this proposal does not amend the building code at all. So whatever the building codes are, both in New York City as well as, again, there are federal and state laws that do sometimes impact construction. I'm thinking about ADA accessibility, for example. Like those all still apply. None of this supersedes that or makes any of those other laws moot by any means. This simply says what you could in theory build, but you still, even it's in theory, you still need to comply with all the other codes, right? So in theory, I could, if I have one of these properties in one of these red areas, I could build a 2 to 4 story building above, a 1-story commercial. But if there's a circumstance where for whatever reason I can't do so, and also comply with other codes, then I just won't build it. This doesn't supersede any other applicable codes out there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Quashi. Ms. Booth? Your hand is raised. Can't hear you, Ms. Booth. Can anyone else hear her, or is it just me?
I cannot hear anything.
Yeah, I can't hear anything either.
I think she's muted.
Apologies, Ms. Booth. If you sign back in, I'll get your question answered, but in the interest of time, I'm gonna have to move on. Or if you could put it in the chat, that would be a way to get it addressed. If not now, at a later point in the meeting. Apologies. Try to re-sign back in. I'm not sure why the audio isn't working for you. But we'll close out the topic on town center zoning, which I think was fair. I think it was done in a reasonable amount of time, and hopefully everybody had their questions answered. We'll move on to topic 2. Was it transit orientated development, the TOD? I'm gonna lower Ms. Booth's hand so we can figure out that situation. Do we have any questions pertaining to the transit orientated development? This one, like it says on the screen, allows for modestly sized transit orientated apartment buildings over 5,000 square feet in proximity to train stations. Is there any questions? Joan Erskine?
Oh, that's what it is. Okay.
Hi. What is the short end of the block? I don't understand that.
If you think of a typical city block, there's like one end that's longer and one end that's shorter. It's describing that end of the block because in the past we've seen larger apartment buildings built on that end, but in the zoning it's a dimension. I'm forgetting the dimension exactly, but if you just think of like your typical zoning, typical city block is that shorter side.
Sure. So the short end is the shorter side. So it wouldn't be along the avenue, it would be along between 2 streets, not between 2 avenues here in East Flatbush.
Yeah, so
Okay, got it.
so like most city blocks are, not most, but many city blocks are rectangular, right?
Got it. No, I understand. Like here, between 39th Street, East 39th Street and East 40th Street is relatively short compared to between Farragut and Foster. So it wouldn't be along the Farragut and Foster Avenue side. Got it. All right. That's all I needed to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so if you imagine what's shorter to walk between here and here, that's where it would be, because that tends to be where more activity is located, and those tend to be the wider streets anyway. As opposed to the usually more low scale residential, side streets where this would not be applicable.
Got it. So instead of end, in my language, you mean the short side of the block. Okay, never mind. Got it.
I can also get the definition that we wrote in the zoning for that, and I can put it in the chat too.
All right. I saw Kamara's hand, but that disappeared, so I'm going to move on to Dawn.
Hi. So we have a question about this short end, long end. It is the short end, but I think the way I'm reading it is that it can also be on the long end of the block if the size is over 5,000 square feet. Is that correct?
Yes, if it's mapped on a wide street, so if the street is more than 75 feet wide.
So it would have it. So two things would have to be true. Like it would have to be on a wide street and 5,000 square feet. It can't just be one of those things.
Right. But it can either be on a wide street or a short end of the block. And this example here, this corner, it appears to be on both since it's the corner. Or it's not quite clear if it's on the short end of the block, but the corner lots can be both.
Okay. And
If
we have.
it,
Go ahead.
sorry, I was just if it would be helpful to just like share my screen quickly, perhaps I can kind of maybe
So is
put
there a
some of
world
the
where it can be, is there a world where it can be anywhere, like in the middle of the block?
so do you mind, Ina, if I share my screen quickly?
Go for it.
Great, thank you. All right, let me get to where I'm trying to go. Right. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
It should, yeah, you see the map. All right. I mean, yeah, so this is this is Google Maps. I tried to bring up Zola. Let me see if it's working. It's not. So yeah, I mean, you could see, for instance, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but like 39th and 40th Street right here, is like that block is a rectangle formed by 39th Street, Clarendon, 40th Street, and Avenue D. This would be applicable on a 5,000 square foot lot near transit. I don't know if this is near transit. I'm just bringing this up as an example, but if it were near transit, this would be applicable along Avenue D or Clarendon Road, because those are the short ends of that rectangle, right?
Yeah.
It would not, yeah.
The
But
geometry of oh, go ahead.
sorry, go on.
Yeah, the rectangle makes sense. We were just trying to figure out if it meets the other points there, if it could then end up on East 39th Street. If it were
Right,
like a
I
wide
understand.
street or 5,000.
Exactly, yeah. So in theory, on 39th Street, somebody could take advantage of this proposal if 39th Street is over 75 feet wide, which I don't believe it is, but you know, pretend that it is for these purposes. Yes, and the block and the lot that you're building on would need to be over 5,000 square feet, which is somewhat larger than your standard, like, you know, 25 feet by 100 or 25 feet by 150 foot, you know, lot is less than 5,000 square feet. So you need to have a large lot and be on a large street or on like one of these, you know, more active streets on the short end of the block.
Okay,
I
that
hope
makes
that
sense.
helps.
So both would have to be true. And then we had
Yes.
a question really quickly, sorry. It was mentioned that zoning would not change for areas, like the zoning of an area would not change. But if you are within the half a mile of a subway and currently not zoned for these taller buildings, does that impact you then? Like technically, would your zoning then change to include that? Or then would it not be included there?
So nothing in this proposal is changing the zoning districts, right? So if you live in, let's say, an R4 zoning district today, if this passes, you would still live in an R4 zoning district. But what is permitted within those R4 zoning districts is what is being modified.
Okay, so it would still be R4, but then now there would be this allowance for larger buildings that wasn't there before.
Correct, yes, and you know, if it meets those circumstances.
Okay, thank you. Did you have another
I
question?
also, real quick, I wanted to address one thing that I saw in the chat about whether this includes bus service. It does not. This is only trains and subways. If you're near a bus station, this does not make you qualify.
Thank you. Thank you, Dawn. Valerie, addressing you again. I see your name. Are you there?
Yes, can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, yes, so I'm trying to understand, I'm kind of back to the town center zoning. So he had said that, I believe in an R4 and R5,
Mhm.
they'd be able to go up 1 story higher. And I'm trying to understand what that means. I think he's probably familiar. I don't know if he's familiar with President Street and between Utica and Rochester. And those are 2 family homes, sort of similar to I don't know what zoning it is, but they have gone up in 1 or 2 of those buildings on that block. When I grew up, I kind of spent my teenage years in that area, and those houses were like 2 family, and now there's like an extra floor. So I'm now in this district. Is that what we're looking at? Where, a lot of these buildings, 2 family homes, are going to have like are going to be allowed to have an extra floor. Is that what, so we could have a hodgepodge of some buildings, there's 2 family, just 2 stories still, some are 3. And just the look of, will just so dramatically change what we're used to. So I'm just trying to understand what exactly we're talking about here. Is that what he's talking about, where we just build another floor on a lot of these buildings if we want to?
I appreciate the question. Can everyone see the table that I'm sharing on my screen?
We can.
Yes. So this is in the illustrated guide that we have on our website, and this is really where it gets down to the weeds, the nuts and bolts of it. So this is the town center zoning table. This tells you what is permitted today, if nothing changes, if a builder wanted to build something today, and what they would be allowed to do if this proposal does pass. So again, let's take an example. Let's look at an R2A district. I'm looking at that row that says R2A. The FAR would change from 0.5 to 1.0. But if we go to the right side, you can see the difference in the heights. The base height, which is where you have to get your setback going, the base height is currently 21 feet. So you could build to 21 feet, and then you'd need to step back a certain amount of feet and build to the maximum height. That will change to 35 feet. The maximum height will not change in the R2A district. So I'm looking at this row right here, right? If we look at other districts, the maximum height would change, right? So let's take, again, for example, R4B. Currently, the maximum height that one could build is to 33 feet. And if this proposal passes as proposed, it would be 45 feet. So this is really where we get to the nuts and bolts of it. So you can, really visualize kind of where the impacts would be and what that may look like in your neighborhood.
So worst case scenario, and on the average block in an R, I think you said R4 too. Yes, at first you said an R2. Would you have a picture of what an R2 looks like? Because I believe R2 districts are really, many of them are really lovely homes. I think, with sometimes big yards. I might be wrong, but that's what I'm thinking. I know what the R4 looks like, and worst case scenario, every house on the average street in an R4 district, like we have over here in East Flatbush, a good segment of East Flatbush, and you are allowed to build 45 feet. I'm very bad at even imagining what that would look like.
I can fill that in for you. Hold on, because this is another topic. I don't want it to linger. What you're experiencing and what you're describing is something that's been going on with our zoning issue in our district. We have many of our properties, although they're built as 2-family homes, they're not utilizing the full potential of the FAR allowable on the lot. So what you're seeing is developers are coming and they're buying these homes, and then they're utilizing the available floor area ratio. And that's what's causing the additional houses in the districts, in the areas that you're discussing. The town center zoning is only pertaining to the commercial areas where they're planning to put additional housing on top of commercial buildings.
So the town center zoning, what I'm talking about, what I'm concerned about is not town center zoning, it's something else.
Correct.
And what would that something else be? Have we gotten to it yet? No?
It's not a part of this particular topic. It's basically the
It-
underutilized FAR of many of the houses in our district and how it's mapped. But that doesn't particularly pertain to this topic. No.
There is a part of this, which we call district fixes, that will modify some of those regulations, even on the side streets, on some of those, lovelier homes. We think in a way that is pretty modest, but we can get to that when we get to that. And I can, again, bring up the specific numbers for you.
Perfect.
Happy to do so.
All right.
Excellent.
Okay.
Ms. Viglianti.
Oh, yes, hi. I just wanted to make one point before I ask my questions. I mean, CB 17 doesn't really have any R2 districts. I don't think so. We kind of have to disregard that because we really don't have that space in our district. But so my questions go to the transit-oriented thing that we were talking about. Just if you could put that back up on the screen.
If you can.
If you can, if not, I can just ask the question. Someone asked a question about whether this could be built in the middle of the block, and you said if all the requirements were met, and that would mean having enough area. So, theoretically, if a developer comes in and buys up like 4 or 6 properties in the middle of a block, then they could do it in the middle of the block, correct?
Yes, only if that street that they're on is over 75 feet wide and they're within a half mile of a train station.
Right, but it could still be built in the middle of a block.
Right, as long as it
That's
meets those other conditions.
okay, and it could easily meet those other conditions, right?
I mean,
It's not that
we're
hard to meet those conditions. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
right. I mean, like the definition of easy and hard is subjective, but like it's not so buying up property and putting them together to make a 5,000 square foot lot is certainly doable and certainly something that people would probably do, but you cannot change where a subway station is and you can't change the width of a
Right.
street. Right. So
Right.
most of our side streets, in other words, like the long end of the block, between two avenues usually, most of those are not 75 feet wide. And so even if you got a 5,000 square foot lot, you still wouldn't be able to take advantage because you're on a narrow street.
Okay. Thanks.
And just to add that a lot of this district doesn't even fall within the transit zone, like the R4 district on the southeast side wouldn't be able to meet these criteria simply because it's
Well, not right. Excuse me, but right now, no. But they're just in discussion to build the IBX. So then a lot more of this district would fall into that zone once that's up and running. So nobody's taking that into account, but that will be, if it happens, which it seems like it's going to at some point, then a lot more of the area would be open for that kind of development.
yeah,
In
after
theory. Sorry, Talia, go on.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Okay. Moving on to the next topic, which would be the ADUs, the accessory dwelling units. Hands up, hands down. Questions pertaining to the ADUs, accessory dwelling units. Looking in the chat. Back to the hands. Up, just in hands. All right. Joan?
Okay, so the use of these units, are they restricted as to use? Are they for habitation only? Can someone start a store or a dance hall or an exercise studio?
Nope, these are fully residential units. The only non-residential activity that'd be permitted in an accessory dwelling unit would be the same thing that's permitted in an ADU now, which is essentially if someone were working from home or like, operating a one-person small business, from the computer in their home. That's permitted in every apartment today or every home. And it would be permitted in ADUs, but these are designed to be residential units exclusively.
And how is that enforced?
Mm-hmm.
But you just got this stuff. How do you know?
And it's enforced the same way that the rule is still enforced for any other home or apartment, in that they need to get their permits, right, to apply for them. When they get those permits, they need to pass through our entire process, and those processes are open to inspections. And it's the same way as anything else. If there's a business operating in an apartment building that should be residential, people will call it in and complain about it. We'll go out and inspect it, and there'll be fines or it'll be shut down if need be.
Okay. And the residential aspect of the added unit even if the place is sold, even if the property is sold, that unit has to remain residential, correct?
Correct.
Yes. So yeah, this does
Okay,
not
and second
change.
question. And the
Go
ADU
ahead.
cannot be sold separately. So I couldn't build one in my backyard and then sell it to someone else, like divide my lot.
I'm not sure about that off the top of my head. Let me check my resources and see if I can get that.
I mean, I wouldn't even divide my lot. I could just say, okay, I'm going to sell somebody my shed and give them an easement to get to it. Could I do that?
We could talk to our council division and get back to you on this question, because I know this has been in conversation, but I'm not sure what the conclusion on that was.
Okay. Right, that's a question.
Thank you. Adele?
Thank you.
Oh, yes, thank you. Now you mentioned the EDU, and my question is the price range for low, middle, and upper. And exactly how many units per building for each?
So again, I appreciate that question. Again, this is simply change the rules for what a private property owner would like to construct. It doesn't regulate the price of these ADUs the same way that if I, as a property owner, built a small apartment building, I set kind of the price as I see fit. What we do see in a lot of other cities, and what we anticipate seeing, given a lot of our outreach to folks who are interested in building ADUs, because we've heard of a lot of folks who are, is that many of the ADUs will be built for family members. A lot of folks we see intending to have grandparents live on the property, but still have their own space, or having a child move back, come back from school or something to be on the property with their family, but still have their own space. And so if that happens, perhaps they won't be charged anything. However, someone could, in theory, still just rent it to kind of, someone else who just needs a place to live, and then they can set that market rate as they see fit. That said, ADUs have an 800 square foot maximum square footage. And so they tend to be, not mansions, because they have that maximum square footage that they cannot go over. And so what we've seen in other cities, and from our research and what we anticipate seeing here, given that, is that a lot of these are more naturally affordable, simply because of their size and kind of the makeup of what they are, as opposed to, really, really large luxury units. So they're not necessarily, there's no way for us to put an affordability cap on it necessarily, but just given the market realities, we anticipate that these are typically, if they are rented at all to folks that are not in the family, more likely to be naturally affordable and a little bit lower than the market rate that you'd expect in a large luxury, apartment.
But they could be fine property and a higher price than some of the apartments if they have larger spaces inside or more amenities, correct?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear that question.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what I said is that there's no telling really what, they can set the price whatever they choose.
That's correct.
There's no,
There's no mandate to set any prices for a personal property owner.
But I wanted to hear.
yes, correct. There's no mandates. There's no mandates on affordability. That is correct.
Then the mayor should rethink this.
Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Ms. Booth? She talking? Not hearing Ms. Booth. CK Price, Mr. Price? Oh, there goes Ms. Booth.
Yes, okay, sorry about that. Yes, my question about the, losing my thought here. Yeah, the ADUs. So as far as you know, in our district, I think the R4 zone is where this would be most applicable, correct?
In both the R4 and R5 zone, and in fact, a single or two family home anywhere can build an ADU. It doesn't matter which zoning district they're in. If they're in a higher zoning district, like the potential to build more.
Because I don't see our, the most of the houses in our area, we don't have that type of space to even put a shed for tools, not to mention a place where human beings should live. So I just think that we're just willy-nilly, and then maybe that's not the right word, really just destroying the neighborhoods from, making these buildings now, utilizing, for the 45 feet that we're allowed supposedly, and building, a shed in the back of your house, which I don't know what the rules are going to be. Who is going to abide by those rules? You can imagine what it's going to look like in a few years. Who's going to enforce it to make sure that these sheds, they maintain the flavor of the neighborhood? A lot of people here really try to maintain their properties. Many of them do. And to have something like that really inflicted upon them, I think it's unfair, it's wrong, and it's neighborhood destruction, really. It's not really helping. I guess it's going to give some people additional place to live, but it's really just destroying the neighborhood, because a lot of people are not going to do the right thing by building the right sheds. And a lot of people are not, the powers that be are not going to enforce the rules. And so you can imagine what's going to happen. So I just see this whole thing as just not being right at all. So that's it's wrong. So that's all I have to say. Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Booth.
Valerie, I appreciate that. May I respond quickly?
Sure.
So if you could see my screen now, which I hope you can, this again is from our illustrated guide, and this summarizes some of the rules that we have with any of these backyard ADUs. If you cannot comply with these restrictions, you cannot build an ADU. End of story. End of story. So if you don't have the rear yard space to build it, then you can't build it. That's the end of the story. If it's not feasible in many of your neighborhoods, then that simply won't be feasible. Reminder, this is a citywide text amendment, and so there are many places in the city, maybe in CD17, maybe not really in CD17. Maybe they're really only feasible in the Bronx. Maybe they're only feasible in Staten Island. But this is just us kind of letting you know what the regulations could be. In terms of enforcement, we understand that. People, build illegal things all the time. But remember, this proposal is proposing to amend the zoning resolution, which is already a set of rules, right? And so relying on the existing zoning resolution does not change the enforceability aspect, right? The same way that we enforce our zoning today, if we like our zoning today, then the same rules that enforce the zoning today are the same rules that would enforce this. Something else that I'd like to bring up is that people already build a lot of these illegally, right? People we've seen convert basements or garages into ADUs, and because there's no legal way for them to do that, They do it by simply picking up hammers and nails and doing it. And those are the places that are flooded. Those are the places that tend to be unsafe because they don't go through our review process. So saying no to ADUs is totally fair if that's your recommendation. But what we've seen is that people are going to build them anyway. And if people are going to build them anyway, what we want to do is make sure they go through a proper review and inspection process rather than simply, turning a basement or a garage by picking up hammer and nails, which may not have proper ventilation, may not be protected against flooding, so on and so forth. And so what it does is leave a lot of people vulnerable. And so providing an avenue for the ADUs to be legal actually helps these ADUs, which are being built anyway, be safer. But I do appreciate the comment, and we hope to hear more of that in the recommendation that you provide.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Mr. Price?
Good evening. Good evening, all. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. A quick comment or two, and then two questions. I forgot my second comment. The first comment I was going to make is based on an earlier presentation. My understanding is the idea of ADUs, the expectation of ADUs rather, is that most of them are not actually going to be outdoor sheds, but additions in basements and above buildings. Is that correct?
It's not exactly clear like what the turnout will be, but like as David was stating earlier, there are circumstances where a detached ADU wouldn't make sense. Like if it's on a smaller lot, if they have a basement to convert, they might be more likely to do that. It really depends on the circumstance.
Right. I just wanted to throw that out there because I think a lot of people are getting caught up on the idea of a detached, separate entity and aren't thinking through that there are other options for it, as seen in the slide here. My two questions are, one, regarding the ADUs as businesses, does that include them being rented out? And my second question is actually borrowed from Ms. Allison Martinez from an earlier presentation, which is, has anyone given thought to the tax implications of developing an ADU, what that would do to people's property values? And I'll add that there are related questions from Mr. Dawes in the chat.
I'd like a little bit of clarity on that first question, if you wouldn't mind. You said in terms of using these as a business, does that apply to renting?
You said it could be, the ADU could be used as for home business, right?
No.
I'm asking.
Oh, sorry. Go on. Finish your thought. My bad.
No, if I'm mischaracterizing, please correct me. That's what I thought.
I want to hear the full thought. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. I'm just asking if if an ADU can be used as a home business, like a work from home situation, I suppose. Would that include renting the space out as a dwelling because it's a residential space? So either as, I'm not even sure what the current Airbnb type laws are, but as that, or as a longer term rental space.
I think I understand. Talia, do you want to?
Yeah, so they could be rented out, but not as Airbnbs. There are pretty strict Airbnb rules that got put in place this year. That they would need to be longer than 30-day rentals. And if it's being used as a home occupation, it can only be used by the person whose home it is, because that would be accessory to, or in addition to what somebody's living situation is. So you couldn't rent it out for somebody to do a home occupation. It would have to be the person living there doing.
Right, because then you're creating a commercial space on a residential.
Right.
I get it.
Yeah, And the second question was about how it could affect your taxes. So property taxes are based on what's built, right? Not necessarily what the zoning allows. If I live in a zoning district where the zoning rules change, but I don't actually change anything about my property, then my taxes don't really change, my property taxes, because it's based on what's built there. So if I, in theory, wanted to add an ADU to my home, that could lead to a small increase in taxes. However, it does not bring it into a new tax class, which is usually what is the major increase in taxes, right? So that's usually 4 units or more, if my understanding is correct. I can clarify that later. But if I have a 1-unit building or a 2-unit building and I want to add an ADU, I would still remain in the same like tax class in terms of like property taxes. So my taxes may go up a little bit by having that ADU, but the class wouldn't change. And the tax class is usually the larger property tax changes.
Thank you. Ms. Viglianti, and that'll close out the questions on the ADUs. Ms. Viglianti?
Yeah, can you put the ADU info back up with where it gives you the dimensions of how far everything has to be away from lot lines and things?
Certainly. Hold on 1 second. Right. And this is for, again, only detached ADUs.
Right, right. That's really more my bigger concern. I'm not so concerned about people using their basement space or even attic space. I'm more concerned about the detached and also additions to the back of a property, because that impacts people that live on both sides of that property. I've seen it being done, and it's very uncomfortable for the people that live next door to these type of things, especially the add-ons, because that's being done all over the place. The detached ADUs that's like a brand new thing. So the way it looks, because what you said, David, was that it might not even be something that could be put into our spaces, but the way it looks to me, that could go into any backyard, because our lots are 20 feet wide, so you'd have to have 5 feet on each side. So theoretically, you could put a 10-foot space and 25 feet high. How far back does it have to be from the property that already exists?
You mean, oh,
Well,
sorry, Talia, go ahead.
Yeah, how far back does it have to be built from the existing property? How far back on the lot?
A minimum of 10 feet.
Right, so then there's way enough room to build these on every property in this community, every single or 2-family.
Actually, the detached ADU only really works on properties that are greater than 25 feet. It works the best
Why is
on
that?
lots.
Yeah, it works the best, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work on a 20-foot property, because there aren't many 25 feet. I mean, those are lesser. Most of the properties are 20 feet wide. So it can still work on a 20-foot wide property. It might not work that well, but according to the distance, according to these numbers, it would work.
It would also have to meet the minimum requirements, building code requirements for square footage for like the smallest unit possible. So in modeling out these scenarios, it was an unlikely option for.
What's the smallest unit possible?
I believe it's around 300 square feet, but that's for like the smallest studio apartment.
So if you were doing 25 feet high by 10, that doesn't quite make 300 square feet.
Right.
But if it only has to be 10 feet back from the property, I don't know. I'm a little bit confused about that. I have to do the numbers, because it seems to me like it could be put into any of our backyards. And I'm very concerned about that. I don't really, whatever. I'm just concerned about that. I think that's going to destroy our quality of life because we're going to be just having these things right next to us, right behind us, 2 feet high, right behind my house, on either side of me. I mean, it's not a good thing. I don't think. But I like those numbers. I would like more information about also well, I asked this question the last couple of presentations. I think Ms. Erskine asked the question today about can you sell the property separately? And I think I've asked these questions and you always say you're going to get back to us, but we haven't gotten that information yet. So I hope we can get that information because that's really important too. If I build it, then can I sell it?
Yep.
So I think that's really important for us before we even make we can't make any decisions if we don't have all the answers to all our questions.
The thing is, Ms. Viglianti, that I want to stress is that we have to make a decision based off of the plan
I
that's in
know.
front of you now.
Oh, so what I'm saying, yeah, what I'm saying is I've asked this question on the last 2 presentations, and they keep saying they're going to find out and get back to us, and they haven't.
Decision is made.
So I think that's
And
not, excuse me?
I think your decision is made, if that's the case. I'm trying
My
to-
decision is made.
Yeah, I think it is.
But I'm talking about other people also.
Yeah, sure.
Everybody needs this information.
Well, I do want to clarify, like, you are certainly providing a recommendation on what's before you, but to clarify, you have free reign to make a detailed recommendation. Like, in theory, you have free reign to say, we don't like the ADU proposal as proposed. We would like it more if it had these restrictions. You know, you have free reign to do that. And we actually encourage that because that gives us more information about the desires and the needs of the community.
Sure, that's great, but I'm just saying if we don't have answers to our questions, then we don't really know what recommendations we can make if we don't have all the answers in front of us.
Understood. Yeah, we're in kind of communication with Mr. Afra as well as other members of the board. If you send your questions there, we can communicate them and get them back to you even after the presentation is done. This is not the only opportunity we have to, communicate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Let me check just checking for questions in the chat. Seeing comments. Okay. Moving on to UAP, Universal Affordability Preference. Do we have any questions pertaining to UAP? Check the chat again.
Yes, Ms. Bennett, I'd like you to clarify that terminology, please.
Universal Affordability Preference? Okay. Sorry, I can't see the hands for some reason. All right. Ms. Bennett had a question. She wants a definition for UAP. I think
I'm sorry, a definition?
yeah, I guess that was the question. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Oh, okay. No.
What terminology?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to respond. So UAP is what we are calling this program that would be applicable in high density districts, right? So here I can share my screen yet again and kind of do that here. It's not really a word that is a definition. It's just kind of like what we're calling the program, and then I could detail what the program implies here. So first thing I want to say, I hope you can see my screen. The first thing we want to say is this is only applicable in our medium and high density districts, right? So this would not be applicable in an R1, R2, R3, R4, or R5 districts. This does not apply. Does not apply. It applies in R6 through R10 districts, right? And so basically what the regulations would be is that right now there's rules that say that you can build a larger building than most other buildings in these high density districts if it is for affordable senior housing. That's the way that the rule is today. right? It says you could build a bigger building if it's for affordable housing for seniors. Basically, what we're doing here is saying if we already allow these buildings for affordable senior housing, let's allow them for all types of affordable housing, right? Affordable housing for seniors, yes, but also affordable housing for families, affordable housing for anybody who needs affordable housing, period. So basically what it says, I'm going to scroll down to the specifics because I know we want to get to the specifics. So let's take, I don't know, let's take any of these. Let's take R6, R6 wide or whatever. That's the one that's highlighted here, right? So if you're in an R6 on a wide street, again, 75 feet wide or more, currently your basic FAR that you can build is 3.0. So that's 3 times the floor area of the lot itself, right? So if you have whatever 500, square foot lot, you could build 1,500 square feet in your building because it's 500 times 3. What we are allowing and what we're proposing is we can say, okay, you can actually build a building to 3.9, right? So it's 0.9 FAR higher and bigger, but that change, the 0.9 bonus that you're getting, has to be permanently income restricted. It has to be permanently income restricted. So the market rate FAR is staying exactly the same. The extra bonus that you get, if you choose to take advantage of this program, has to be permanently affordable housing. And some of the heights are also changing slightly, which you can see here, to accommodate some of that floor area so that the affordable housing can actually be built.
Hopefully that answers. I'm typing into the chat. I believe Dawn had a hand raised.
Yeah, so it's AMI. What area are we talking about here? Is it the neighborhood? Is it the city? Is it the borough? What's the area that the percentage is being taken of for the affordable housing?
I believe somebody wrote this in the chat that it's based on the region, like New York City, Long Island, Westchester, Putnam, and Rockland County. Yeah, Kwame, I believe you wrote that in the chat.
So, okay. So yeah, I don't think that's necessarily always very affordable in every area and translates, but that's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
unfortunately,
understood.
these are levels that are set by the federal government, so.
Yeah, we're continuing to advocate, as is the rest of the city, on a better income structure, but that's lobbying and advocating for the federal government to kind of change what they could do. And so our unfortunately, our hands are kind of tied there, but the affordability is going to be much deeper than what it is right now. So is it perfect? No, but we do think it's an improvement from 80% AMI to 60% AMI average.
Thank you. Hopefully that answers your question, Dawn. Do you have an additional question?
No, that answers our question. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Spence?
Yes. My question is very general. I live in R71 district, and how would the UAP apply to R71? We're seeing these larger buildings going, huge buildings. 2-family homes are being replaced by 12, 13, 18-story buildings at 130% AMI. How would the UAP apply to, say, an R71 district? We don't see permanently affordable housing. I mean, how would that apply to a district like ours? I can't hear. Am I?
Oh, yes, sorry, I was on mute. That was my mistake. If you could see my screen here, again, this is from the illustrated guide, which is
I'm very sorry, but I can't. The only thing I have accessible is my phone, and I can't see your screen. I'm sorry.
okay. Well, then I can read them out to the best of my ability. So, it depends on 2 things. It depends on whether in an R7 district specifically. It depends on whether you are in. Right, I understand. It depends on whether you're on a wide street or a narrow street, which we can help you figure out if you'd like to contact us later. But
Okay. I'm pretty sure it's a wide street. They're very wide.
okay, if you're on a wide street, then the FAR that somebody could build right now, if nothing changes, is 4.0. So again, that's 4 times the floor area of the property you have, right? The ground.
Mm-hmm.
What would be permitted is 5.0, but that 1.0 difference, the floor area between what's allowed now and what would be allowed after this, has to be permanently income restricted at an average AMI of 60%. The height is currently the height regulation on a wide street. You have to build to a maximum of 80 feet. That's the maximum you could build to. If this is passed, the maximum height would be 115 feet, because otherwise there's no way for the affordable housing to actually be built. You'd have the floor area allowance, but the height wouldn't actually allow it. So that's the proposal.
Okay. It just seems to me that the density, you know, we're already overrun by these huge buildings. I mean, I'm on a lot 35 by 200. The lot next to mine is also 35 by 200, and they want to build a 16-story building. So I guess, you know, I'm very concerned about density. You know, on this would, to me, this would just increase the density in an area that's just overpopulated, overdeveloped. I'm just concerned about that.
Yeah, we appreciate that. That's definitely legitimate. The one thing that we'd say, which is, you know, understood that may not be sufficient, is that, you know, Ina went over at the beginning of the presentation how a few community districts really add a lot of the housing because housing is locked out of other districts, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've spoken about how CD17 has actually added quite a bit of housing. And from our research, we've seen that the reason for that is because people are dying to build in other neighborhoods, right? They would love to build in Community District 10, they'd love to build in Community District 11, they'd love to build elsewhere, but the regulations simply don't allow them. And so that puts all of the development pressure on places that allow it, like CD17. What we're trying to do here is, again, this is a citywide proposal. And so what we anticipate would happen is that if we release things a little bit and add this flexibility, the development pressure will be kind of released a little bit from that valve, where instead of developers all coming to CD17 because it's the only place that allows housing or one of the few places that allows housing, they'll finally be able to build in other places where people want to live, which would ease a little bit of the development pressure. That said, you're absolutely right. In theory, builders could build large buildings in.
Okay. All of a sudden, I can't hear. I can't hear.
No, the end of what he said just cut off a little bit.
Can you just repeat that, the end of what you said?
Dave, you're muted.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. Yeah, he might be having technical.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm having some technical difficulties. Yeah, if you could repeat that, that'd be good.
The last part of what you stated before you were cut off. I guess it's the last thing you said. Could you just repeat it?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know how much you heard, but basically.
Good. Lost him again.
I can continue that thought. I think what he was saying is that in theory, developers could build up to the numbers that that you see in the chart. But this wouldn't be such a large leap from what R7 can do already. It just happens that this area is
elsewhere
underbuilt.
Right.
All right. Thank you for your response.
Thank you, Ms. Spence. Seeing no other questions, I'm just going to review the chat. I do have a question. Tima?
Oh, yes, hello, good evening. I just had a question regarding the pricing for these apartments. I know in the chat it was saying that the developers would still be in charge of determining pricing. And so I wanted to know if that's still going to be the case and there's not going to be any regulations on what they're charging for rent. Like, how is this going to actually help the housing crisis?
I'll pull up some information. Talia, do you want to begin by talking about UAP 60% AMI?
Sure, yeah. So UAP would be if a developer chooses to do it, it would be a bonus where 25% of the units would be required to be set at an average of 60% area median income, which is a drop from what's required now of 80%. In voluntary inclusionary housing areas. So we see this as an advancement. But the buildings would have to be funded by the market rate units. So this is how a lot of affordable housing gets built.
Well, yeah, and so I'm sharing my screen now again. I hope folks can see this. These are the AMI levels right now. And again, AMI is measured at the federal, the federal government kind of strangleholds us here and they use a regional area. Someone put in the chat that it includes Suffolk County. I think that's true. We'd love for it to be updated. Our hands are unfortunately tied there. So we're working within what we've got. I see another thing in the chat about they set the price. For these units, that's actually not true. So for some of the previous proposals we spoke about in the low density districts, the town center zoning, the transit oriented development, those are to be set at the market rate. And so people can charge how they see fit. That said, we have a lot of research showing that even market rate development decreases rents over the long term if we actually add enough. But for this proposal here, for UAP in high density districts, the bonus floor area you use has to be income restricted. So what does that mean? If you're a family of three, just for instance, you could see in the chart right here. If you're a family of three, and I'm highlighting this, you make $83,000 per year, that puts you in 60% AMI. And then that is what you basically would be charged according to that. You'd be charged, I believe, 30% of your income, like according to that roughly. And what is really good and something we're really happy about with UAP compared to the existing affordability preference or the existing affordability we have right now, the existing affordability program that we have that this would be replacing says that all the affordable units have to be set at 80% AMI, right? And there's no wiggle room there. If I want to use that existing affordability program, all those units have to be set at 80% AMI, no matter what. What we're proposing here is something called income averaging, which means that the average is A, it's going to be lower than 80% AMI, so it's going to be deeper affordability. And B, you can average out to 60% of AMI. So let's say for the sake of conversation, for the sake of simplicity, I want to use that extra bonus floor area to build 3 units. They need to be restricted, affordable in perpetuity. I can build a 30% AMI unit, which is more deeply affordable, right? A 3-person family making under $50,000, for instance, $41,000 here. And they could build a 60% and they could build a 90%. So it serves folks at different levels of affordability. It serves people with different needs. And so that's something that we're excited about as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
And also just to add that these new FARs and heights would also apply to buildings that are 100% affordable that HPD constructs. If it's a property on government-owned land, very often HPD will build these buildings in zoning districts such as R6 and R7-1. So this wouldn't just be like developer-led in theory.
Thank you for the clarification, Ms. Viglianti.
Hi, if
Yes.
I could just jump in. I'm sorry. This is Ina. I just want to note that so today with MIH, HPD contracts with so-called housing ambassadors across the city to lease out the income restricted units. And there's all kinds of reporting and other legal requirements to ensure that those units are rented at those AMIs, and that they remain affordable in perpetuity. So HPD does play a regulatory role.
Ms. Viglianti?
Yes, Mr. Efray, is this the last time we're going to be talking about the city of Yes?
Correct.
Okay. I came into the meeting a little late, but I don't think we talked about the rest of the proposal that's not about housing specifically. It's about, outdoor amusement spaces, entertainment, nightlife,
Well, that was the
fun-
EO. This is
huh?
what happened. That was the EO, which was voted on earlier today and passed.
We don't have to discuss that again because we already did that, right?
It's already been voted and passed, or at least a version
Right.
of it is. This is for housing opportunity, so it's central
Right.
specific housing opportunity.
Right. Okay.
Good? Cool.
Yep, it's good.
All right. Let me just check the questions in the chat. I'll try to be fair. But the next topic of discussion will be the updates to the MIH, which is the mandatory inclusionary housing. Okay. Yes, the mandatory inclusionary housing. Do we have any questions pertaining to the updated rules or updated variances for the MIH? Just lowering your head, Ms. Vega, I think it was still up, unless it was up for that. If so, unmute yourself. All right, seeing no questions there, the topic of the night. The parking mandates. The next topic is the ending of the parking mandates. Can we put up the slide for illustration and informational purposes? Can anyone share? Any questions pertaining to the ending of the parking mandates? Mr. Erskine?
How it doesn't, we already have, it just in the time that I've lived here in East Flatbush, there has been a large increase in the number of cars being parked on the street. It seems like it doesn't matter whether you say make there be parking spaces or not. People are going to get their cars and they're going to drive them, and they're going to drive around all night if they have to find a parking place on the street. How is, I just don't understand how losing the mandate for the minimal parking that we have is going to help at all with the already too many cars and not enough spaces that we have at this time. How is that going to help? I mean, it will give more apartment space, but then the people in those apartments are going to want to park their cars too. So how is this going to help?
Hi, Ms. Erskine. I appreciate the question. So really what this comes down to is the Department of City Planning is really, really bad at knowing how many parking spaces are appropriate in a certain place, right? And that means in high density neighborhoods and low density neighborhoods, right? So we put in our parking mandates in, 1961. Occasionally we've altered them, we've changed them, as we see fit, I guess, but it never really seems to work out. And what really it results in is an area, again, maybe not CD17, in fact, definitely not CD17, but in other neighborhoods of the city, thinking those that are high density, downtown Brooklyn or other higher density places that are really good transit access that tend to have a lot of people who do ride subways or are able to ride subways or bike or whatever, who don't want to own cars or just don't own cars. Those developers have to build the parking anyway under the status quo. What that means is that we end up with completely empty parking lots because they have to build that parking. What does that mean for a tenant who doesn't own a car? They have to pay because the developer passes through all the costs for building the parking to the rents. Now, in another area of the city, let's say maybe in CD17, where people do often use their cars, what we tend to find is that developers often over provide parking anyway. they tend to provide more parking than we require because they know, again, these developers, they want to make money. We're under no illusion about that. And they know that they're not going to be able to rent these units at a good price point and get their return if they don't include the amenities that people need, which includes parking. So we can bring tons of examples, and I'd be happy to send this after the meeting, of developers who don't only build to the minimum, they build way more than what we currently request. And so really, this is something that the market tends to be pretty good at understanding what the appropriate amount of parking is. In places that are not close to transit and in places where people need parking for their cars and are really only going to pay for an apartment that provides them that parking spot, they tend to provide that parking. This is also what we've seen in the over 30, 35 cities and states across the country that have either reduced or eliminated the parking minimums, is that developers continue to provide parking where it's necessary because they want to make sure that they can market the units. So that's the thought process behind what's kind of going on here. Understood that the on-street parking situation is not great. This will not change any on-street parking regulations. And there will still be ability to add as much parking as one desires. And if anybody has parking on their property, that will stay there basically as long as you don't want to get rid of it. In fact, if you live in a multifamily building and the owner of the property wants to get rid of the parking, they need to get special permission. This is really for new buildings, new construction. So that's the idea behind it.
Thank you. Chair Oni.
Good evening. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. As far as parking, I hear what you're saying and, understand. I have a friend who lives in a building, in Williamsburg with an empty parking lot. So I get it. What I'm wondering is, similar to the transit-oriented development and other considerations where the, the proposed change is customized based on the type of based on the location. I'm wondering why the parking request wasn't customized and instead is just completely getting rid of the mandate versus maybe saying in, these units that are 1 block from a train station, we don't have a parking mandate, but in units that are in a 2-fare zone or a mile away from, some sort of subway or something like that, then we, either maintain the existing parking mandates, or even if it's to decrease it and to say it's a 10% or 20% of units or something like that. But I think what makes us nervous is when you make a blanket change like this that, affects people from Queens to the Bronx to neighborhoods like Williamsburg. People will get affected, in ways that really impact their quality of life. And until the city improves public transportation, the people that are going to suffer are, the elderly, the disabled, the poor, the outer neighborhoods of the outer boroughs. And so, if that's my sort of question and statement, and if I'm to make a recommendation, it would be that I'd love to see some sort of tiered parking consideration versus a complete disregard of the mandate.
Yeah, I completely understand that, and I appreciate that sentiment. The only response that I have, and by the way, I want to still emphasize that whatever recommendations you have, please provide that sort of detail. That's something that's really helpful to us, really helpful to the commission, really helpful to city council to understand what you do and don't like. But I'll just let you know kind of our thought behind that is that tiered system is actually pretty close to what we've currently got, actually, which results in that inefficiency. So for instance, in Manhattan, right, where you can imagine a lot of folks actually don't have cars and, they live pretty close to their amenities. It's a lot of folks who are lucky enough to be able to, walk and bike and so on and so forth. There are very few, if any, residential parking requirements right now. And in fact, there's actually parking maximums where if you want to over-provide parking, you can't do it. That's the same in Manhattan, in at least lower Manhattan, Midtown, as well as Long Island City, I believe. And then as you get out to other areas, our higher density districts have parking requirements, but they're still lower. And then the requirements get higher as we go out. So that's kind of pretty similar to the situation we have now. And we've still found a lot of inefficiencies and a lot of, like you say, the empty parking lots. as well as a lot of developers who continue to over provide parking relative to our mandates. And if they're providing more than our mandates say, that kind of speaks to the fact that our mandates aren't particularly necessary or helpful because they're going to provide what they need to for the market anyway. That said, that's kind of our thought process behind it. That's what a lot of our research from other cities say. But again, we want to hear more about the detailed recommendations from you when we hear from CD17 because that's helpful.
Thank you,
Thanks for the response. I will contact you further. Thank you.
Yes, I will too.
Ms. Spence.
Yes, I just wanted to add, I agree, completely agree with the last comments about being very reluctant to this blanket change. Just want to add that in my area, there are waiting lists. People are renting or buying condos, and there are waiting lists for parking spaces. They're just inadequate in the new buildings that are going up. So that's our reality. I understand that this will be a citywide mandate, but our reality here is that parking spaces are precious, and there are wait lists for parking spaces. So just wanted to add that comment.
Thank you, Ms. Spence.
I agree.
Understood. Appreciate it.
Ms. Quashi. I'm trying to do it in the order, but
Yes. The comment I have, the illustration you gave about 2 parking spaces making 1 studio apartment. Is that realistic? Is that a studio apartment with no bathroom, no kitchen, no nothing? Is that just a room?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I want to clarify. So we don't actually anticipate in many cases that people will take an existing 2 parking spaces and convert it to a unit. That's really an illustration to show that if we want to house, human beings or house cars, what we'd like to do is kind of at least prefer to house human beings with the understanding that cars are necessary in many places. So really it was just an illustration to show that roughly 2 parking spaces, not necessarily the size of 2 cars, because the parking spaces are slightly larger than cars, of course, but 2 parking spaces, we could use, that floor area for housing cars, or we could use it to, get heads in beds. And so that's our thought process behind it. And it was just an illustration, not something that we anticipate people to actually do.
No, I just think it's a bad illustration. Give me an idea about how much space it would take.
Understood.
Because, I would use something else in the future.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. And another thing about the parking, in order to support, people being on foot using public transportation as far as the trains, I guess you're illustrating, what type of good resources as far as supermarkets, banks, what is going to support the infrastructure of this housing for people to utilize the community so that they could be on foot, where they wouldn't have to go outside and not need a car.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think this really goes to the fact that this is the 3rd proposal in 3 text amendments of City of Yes, right, which Mr. Afford just went over before. The first one being carbon neutrality, the second one being economic opportunity, and this one being housing. If you're present and participating during our zoning for economic opportunity discussions over the last few months, end of 2023, roughly, that is a proposal that seeks to make it much easier for small businesses to operate and to be successful in a lot of the places near where this housing could be built, right? And so they really do work in tandem and seek to complement each other for the reasons that you state, right? What we found is that there are a lot of places near housing or near places where, housing could be appropriate, where businesses, supermarkets, banks, clothing stores, dry cleaners, etc., simply cannot operate because of our zoning rules. And so that's what zoning for economic opportunity sought to address. Made it much easier for small businesses and retail. Adele, I see your item in the chat of I can't shop here or bank. That's what we sought to make a little bit easier with zoning for economic opportunity. So we anticipate that a lot more of those businesses will be available for people within walking distance or biking distance if they, have the ability to do so. And then the housing will help to support those businesses by providing, more patrons and customers to those businesses as well. So they're designed to kind of help build upon each other.
So you're hoping they'll come.
Say that once more.
So you're hoping they will come.
Sure, but I do want to emphasize that hope is not based upon wishful thinking or theory. It's based upon mounds of research that we've done both in New York and in the other cities around the country and around the world. That's kind of led us to the conclusions that we've got.
Because the only reason I'm stating this, and I know we're getting off topic, is because we lost a lot of resources already in our community.
Right, understood. And again, from our research, from looking at small business success and failure and difficulties, that a lot of that difficulty and a lot of the fact that small businesses find it very difficult to stay open or even open in the first place was because of our zoning rules, which is what zoning for economic opportunity, the previous text amendment, sought to address.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quash.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Dawn? Your hand is raised?
Yes. So my position as it relates to parking is the tiered approach is interesting, but I definitely don't think that you should get rid of mandates, because ultimately what's going to happen is they'll just clearly build, because let's face it, it's developers who don't really live in our community anyway. So if they can put another apartment, they're going to. People are still going to have cars, and I own property here and can't find a parking space to save my life. So it's going to be that much worse.
Okay.
Understood. Again, if we're going to talk about developers, they may or may not live in your community, and that's fair. But what they do want, and I think most of us here would agree, is that they want to make money. And what we found, again, from our research is that many of these developers who are building in places like CD17 or other areas that don't have good transit access already today, under the status quo, tend to provide way more parking than we require. Which speaks to, it doesn't matter what our requirement is, they're going to build more. That's what we believe will happen, again, based on our research, but totally understand your thought, and we'd love to hear more detail about that in the recommendation.
Thank you. Mr. Dawes? Unless, Ms. Dawn, do you have anything additionally to say? Sorry.
No, that was it. Thank you.
No problem.
David, in terms of your research, have you looked into how many companies in CB17 have applied for variances so they don't have to build the parking that's required?
I don't have that information off the top of my head, but I can certainly get that information if you'd like to forward it to Mr. Affray. I'm sure he would forward it to us, and we could do some research and get back to you on that. We do know that
the reason I asked is because you talk about your research nationally and internationally. Can you hear me?
Right. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind repeating that last part.
I said one of the reasons I asked is because you speak about your research nationally and internationally. But if you just take a look at some of the applications for businesses in the area, they don't want to build the extra parking, even though they already know that parking is an issue.
Understood. There are certainly.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I understood. There's certainly a lot of applications for variances and special permits to waive their parking requirements. Those are, typically through BSA, which have to kind of go through a community board process regardless. And yet we've also found many other examples of folks providing parking. So again, that's our research as a department, not necessarily mine individually, but I'd be happy to get a little bit more of that detail for you. Understood your point. Certainly understood.
So my overall point is to agree with a lot of the other members that talk about customization. And the two people before me talked about, yes, a tiered approach could work in certain areas, but we have such a bad parking problem that it shouldn't even be, let's remove only a few of the variances. It should be a situation where we can figure out how to go the opposite way for us, how to make it so that we have more parking. Because we also have situations where prime parking spots are being taken up by zip cars or city bikes, and we
Understood.
don't have enough. Oh wait, let me finish, please. We definitely don't have enough parking. So not only should it be customized, there are some situations where we need relief. We need parking relief. And assuming that people are just going to take the train when we already know how inefficient the train operates is a bad thing, or it is a poor assumption. Especially, for example, the 2 train. It's highly unreliable at night. So for the people that have jobs that are coming home late at night, maybe they would prefer to take the train. But if they have to wait 30 minutes to 45 minutes just to catch a train to get back home, that's problematic. And they'll make the sacrifice to actually drive downtown or drive to work just so they'll be able to come home in a timely fashion. So we need not just a tiered system, not just customization, but ways to actually alleviate the problems that we're already experiencing. We talked about before, if you just take a look at the amount of applications, our neighborhood had a tremendous amount of development already. So you talk about developing more houses. Yes, this would open up some more neighborhoods, but oftentimes developers are going to take the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance has already been demonstrated to be in our neighborhood. So that means more development in our neighborhood. And if we remove the variances that you're talking about, that means that the parking crisis is even worse. We are, to borrow one of your terms, parking burden. And we are already oversaturated with these houses. So not just customization, protections to alleviate neighborhoods that have already done its fair share to add houses to help with the housing crisis. And that
Yeah.
it will be analogous in terms of the parking crisis, because it is a crisis over here. It's a serious problem.
Understood. I appreciate that. I do want to be sure not to conflate 2 things. The parking, but with the parking, totally hear you, and we would love to hear all of that really well-reasoned thought into the recommendation. That really helps us understand kind of the detail of, what's actually happening in the neighborhood. Y'all are the experts in your neighborhoods. I do want to say, though, as for the development in the neighborhood, I did speak to this earlier, but I do want to say to it again, is I think you said it yourself. I don't want to mischaracterize what you said, but the developers go where the opportunity is. I don't think that's exactly the word you use, but go somewhere, where they can go. And I think that's really at the brunt of this proposal is housing development, but more importantly, equitable housing development. I think what we've heard from this board, and we don't disagree at all, is that developers are, coming and building a lot of housing in CD 17 under the status quo. That's true. And that's part of the reason that we have this proposal. And that's part of the big reason, and really the big reason that it's citywide, is that the developers go where the money is, where the opportunity is, right? They could make a whole lot of money if they were able to build in another district, if they were able to build in a lower density district besides CD 17. And under the status quo, they're simply not allowed to. Our zoning resolution does not allow it. And so what we anticipate to happen, again, based on our research, is that if we do kind of allow a little bit more housing in some of those other neighborhoods, just a little bit, folks will actually, right now there's just so much pressure. I'm thinking of like a ball about to explode, in neighborhoods like CD 17. And what that will do, and what we anticipate it'll do, is relieve some of that pressure so the housing can go here and here, places where builders have wanted to build for decades, but we don't allow them to. That's what we anticipate will be the case. Understood that you may not agree, and if you don't, we'd love to hear about that in the recommendation.
Just to clarify, David, I said the path of least resistance. And as you already aptly stated, this is already the path of least resistance. What the proposal that you're discussing with us would make it even easier. So yes, it would make it easier to access other neighborhoods, but the path of least resistance would still end up in our neighborhood. So even if there are some developments in other neighborhoods, it will be even more in ours.
Understood the thought. Understood. Yep. Other community board like developers could, you're right, continue to build in CD 17. That's absolutely correct. And there's no denying that that is a truth, that could happen. But that's not what we anticipate given the market realities because of what I said. But again, if you disagree, totally understood. You know the neighborhood, and we'd love to hear about that in the recommendation.
Thank you, Dr. Dawes. Jat? Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, it's George Tate.
Oh, okay, Mr. Tate.
Yeah, that's me, George Tate.
How you doing, Mr. Tate?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fred. Okay. Yes, again, David, I'm talking about the parking situation. And as you mentioned, developers are in it to make money. Okay. And in making money, if they could make $500 to charge for a parking space versus $3,000 for an apartment, think about it, they are going to go with the apartment because it's a lot more money in renting an apartment that is renting a parking space. Additionally, I'm going to say that right now, even though they have a parking mandate, all the buildings that are coming up in our neighborhood have created a traffic nightmare. So imagine having a mandate and it is a traffic a parking nightmare. What's going to happen if they don't have a mandate? And I guarantee you, because if I was a developer and I didn't have a choice and I didn't have to what you call it, have a parking space, we are could make more money by making an additional apartment. I would go with the apartment. So I said it's going to create more of a nightmare. And personally, I'm going to tell you that sometime me going to a community board meeting when it's raining or one of those places, my decision sometimes is don't go, because if I have to go out there, fight looking for parking space, and then come home fighting for parking space, it's really the influence. And it's the same thing if someone is going to the doctor living in a two-fare zone, and the public transportation around here is ridiculous. So for me to leave and then not gonna be able to find a parking space. Case in point, Wednesday night, I went out, I had to park 4 blocks away from where I live. Okay, and this is 10:30 at night. You know, I'm a senior citizen. I don't think I need to be walking in the dark 10:30 at night, 4 blocks away, just because I went to one police plaza for something. So I totally disagree with them taking away that parking mandate, and I agree with everyone who is opposed to that. That's my comment.
Understood, and I appreciate that. Would love to hear more about that in the written recommendation. The only thing I will say though is at the beginning of your statement, you said, would they rather build a $500, dollar a month parking space or a $3,000 a month apartment? Part of the reason that they can build a $3,000 apartment right now is because they provide parking, right? People are going to pay more for something that has a parking spot included. So what we anticipate will happen is for places that don't provide parking, they'll have to charge less because they don't have that amenity. And so that's kind of part of our thought process here. Understood though, and we'd love to hear more on the recommendation.
With all due respect, I cannot disagree with that statement, because we are in a Uber Lyft society right now. And most of the apartment people that are coming in and renting this apartment are people that they're going to be jumping on Uber and all that. So I don't think that's going to deter them from renting an apartment. So the landlord, the developers will not be losing any tenants just because they don't have a parking space.
Understood. That said, if people in these buildings are likely to use Uber or Lyft rather than use their own cars, does that speak to the necessity of parking? But understood your thought.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tate. Ms. Bennett, and I do want to just have everybody just keep an eye on the time, have respect for everyone's time and just ask your question or make your statement within a
Okay, that's gonna be very
reasonable
short.
allotted time. All right?
Yeah, it's me, Ms. Bennett. Since I agree with George Tate and Ms. Spence and a few others, parking is truly a society established is mainly a car society. Not a bike, not much train to bus, but car. And my parking, I love it. I need it. That's all I want to say. And I think we need to keep that mandate. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Viglianti.
Yes, I disagree with you saying that it's going to relieve pressure. None of this is being done to relieve pressure on communities. It's being done to dismantle zoning regulations and open up everything to developers. That's just my comment. You don't need to respond to that, but my question is, I just wanted to go back to something you said before about the parking, um, where there's current parking an existing building. Did you say that you would need a permit to get rid of that parking that already exists in an existing building?
Hi. Yeah, be happy to respond. I appreciate the question. So I'm not sure if you're able to see what Ina is sharing on the screen right now, but
Yeah.
if you live, I'm sorry.
No, I said yes. Okay. Go ahead.
Right. So this helps. So the second bullet that you see there says that it would require a CPC authorization, in other words, special permission with a whole expensive application process and everything, to remove existing parking except for 1 and 2 family homes.
And does that
So
have to? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
nothing. I was just going to say, if you own a property and you want to keep your parking, then you can do it. This proposal changes nothing about what you want to do in your property. Again, I want to reiterate, this proposal changes the rules. Whether or not people take advantage of those rules is up to them, right? If you are a property owner, then and you say, you know what, I like my parking, I'm going to keep it. Great, keep it.
Well,
This doesn't change anything.
sure, but there's two concerns there. One is whatever this authorization is, does it have to come through a community board where we would recommend it or not? If somebody wants to get that authorization, how do they get that authorization? And the other thing is it says except for 1 and 2 family homes. So that means you can't remove a parking like a driveway or something in a one
If
family house.
Sure. If you're the owner of a 1 or a 2 family home and you want to remove existing parking, you'd be able to do so without special permission. That is true. If you're the owner of a property with 3 or more units, that's where you need to get this CPC authorization. The authorization, Talia, I'm not sure if you know the answer to this. I'm not sure if it's a full ULURP, but regardless of whether it's a full ULURP, basically everything that goes through an authorization or a certification process is at the very least referred to community boards for sufficient time for you to provide recommendations to. I'm not sure if it's in the classic ULURP process, but the difference between ULURP and non-ULURP is actually pretty small, considering that even the non-ULURP applications still are referred to community boards, and whether it's ULURP or non-ULURP, the community board provides a recommendation either way. So it would be at the very least referred to the community board, the CPC authorization.
I think the difference is the timing, like they would have to refer to the community board and then ultimately the city planning commission has to weigh in on it as well, but it may difference in just like the amount of time people have.
Yeah, I think
an authorization.
Yeah, I think usually an authorization, it's a 45 day. I think it depends on the application. It's usually referred to the community board for about a month and a half. And for ULURP, it's a slightly longer period, but at the end of the day, it's still referred to the board. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Price? Mr. Price?
Sorry, my computer didn't want to unmute. I have a question that's not related to parking, so I'm happy to defer it until not too much later, if that's necessary.
All right, yeah, let's just get through the balance of the topics for as far as questions. I'm gonna combine the last few, just in the interest of time. There's one pertaining to additional changes. This is citywide expansions. This is the enable of the conversion of, the expansion of buildings, I guess, or changing that regulation for commercial use buildings. That's one of the topics that's in our survey. The other one is pertaining to re-legalizing small shared apartments. The third for the citywide expansion is eliminating barriers to contextually infilled contextual housing on sites that are not contextual within districts, including campus and irregular sites. And the last and final one, which I think is the one we should focus and concentrate on, is the new zoning districts, which is the which allows for FARs above 12. That's correct. Okay. So do we have any questions pertaining to that? Anybody? Miss Valerie?
No, my question was not pertaining to that. I just wanted to just clarify about the CPC authorization, except for 1 and 2 family homes. So that means that a 2-family home in Brooklyn with a garage and a parking space, in front of the garage, they could actually then just take the garage and that parking area and build another apartment, let's say. They could do that.
They could, in that case, remove the parking. Whether or not they can add another apartment depends on the specific circumstance. But you are correct, they could remove the parking there.
Okay, so for our zone areas that are zone 4, they could go up another story. They could build a shed in the back, and they could eliminate parking. So that's total destruction of the community and the neighborhood for the benefit, as one lady said, of the developer. Because I'm sure that a lot of people won't be able to, have the money to build up. So there was going to be some kind of agreement made with them and the developer, whatever. You know where I'm going with this. Okay, I just wanted to understand, more clearly understand the plan, because that's total destruction of our community. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. It depends on the circumstance, but yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Booth. Ms. Erskine?
Yeah, I had a question about the reauthorizing the what kind of apartments? Said that I don't have it up in front of me, so I can't say it. But
The slide that has the 3 citywide changes is the reauthorizing of shared apartments.
Yeah, what is reauthorizing? What do you mean? You couldn't share an apartment? I've shared an apartment. What are you talking about? What is that?
Yep, great question. We love to talk about that. So what we have now, and we can get into a lot more detail about this, is right now there are a lot of rules that prevent smaller apartments. For certain folks, it makes a lot of sense to live in a smaller shared apartment. I mean, I'm just being anecdotal here, but I'm thinking about, a person like myself 10 years ago, fresh out of college, didn't know how to cook anything in my kitchen, didn't need a lot of space, wanted to really take advantage of just the city and really just, have a small apartment that I didn't need to pay a lot for to put my head on a bed. Because there are so many rules and regulations in our zoning resolution that prevent those from being built, even though they used to be built before our ZR and perfectly habitable, What happens is that folks like myself 10 years ago, you think about, early 20s singles, something like that. What they do instead, because they have nowhere to live alone, they don't have these, small and shared apartment styles that they'd like or that are appropriate for them. What they end up doing is moving into family-sized units, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom apartments or homes as roommates. And I think what we think in the department and what we've is that those larger apartments, those 3-4 bedroom apartments, should really be for families, right? For larger families with children who need them.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you here in the interest of time. I understand how shared apartments work. That's what everyone does.
You're muted, David.
Okay. Okay. David, I'm going to interrupt you.
I can step in if necessary.
Yeah, his mic isn't functioning, but I think she called the question.
I understand how shared apartments work. We all did that. But what I don't understand is there currently a rule against building small apartments, and the only ones that are around are ones that were built before the rule? Is that the case?
Yeah, we have a number called the dwelling unit factor, which would basically mean you have to divide the floor space by this number to determine the number of units that you can have in a building. So this number would dictate it would dictate whether a building can build just a certain number of units. So in areas in the transit zone, we propose eliminating the dwelling unit factor. In areas outside of the transit zone, we would propose a dwelling unit factor of 500, which you would divide the amount of floor space by that number to determine just the number of units that your building could have.
Okay, so in other words, by doing that, that would allow the building of smaller apartments, like
It
studio
would
apartments,
unlock the
1 bedrooms.
possibility for that kind of housing, yeah.
But I see apartments being advertised all the time for studio apartments in new buildings.
Yeah, so studio apartments are still permitted today, but because of the dwelling unit factor that Talia brought up, they are often required to be a lot larger and therefore a lot more expensive than they could be otherwise, right?
Okay.
And so, again, for certain folks, not for everybody, right? A lot of people like their space, and that's great.
No, you
But
don't.
for
You don't
some,
have to. But Dave, you don't have to explain it. We get it. I mean, I just didn't understand how those could not be built. Now I
oh,
see it's because of this rule. Yeah, I'm fine. If somebody wants a small apartment, they want a small apartment. That's great. But because of this rule, there was a limit to how small you could make these apartments, and now you're removing that rule. Got it. Great. Thanks.
I think it would be
and
helpful
also,
if you could describe like what's the current smallest apartment you could build, and then what would be the current smallest apartment with these rule changes.
so I think I'd like to clarify one thing, Talia, maybe you can, help as well, is that it's not only that, but it's also the number of small apartments you could build, right? So for instance, if I want to build a building, because of the current zoning regulations and the dwelling unit factor that Talia brought up, in that building, I could not build a building, a small or a large one, with only studio apartments, right? We think that in certain cases, it actually could be really great to have a building with only studio apartments, because that could catch all the people who want to live alone, right? It gives people the opportunity to live alone if they like that kind of thing. Again, those tend to be much more naturally affordable because they're a little bit smaller while still being safe. They still need to pass all building code, safety, fire escape rules, and everything like that. And then that would free up a lot of the larger units elsewhere in the city for families, right? For 2-3 bedroom units for families. And so it's not necessarily that you can't build a small apartment. You can, and the minimum sizes, I think, would stay the same. But in a building, if a developer wants to build a building of SROs or all small apartments, they can't do that. They'd have to provide a certain small apartments, but then they'd have to provide big ones to balance it out, and whether or not that actually makes sense for the people who, need it. Talia, I don't know if that sounds correct or if you'd like me to
Yeah,
Or if you'd like to
that's
elaborate.
correct. The smallest unit size will remain just dictated by building code. So, like I mentioned way earlier, that's usually around 300 square feet. A developer could build a building with just studio apartments, but it wouldn't really make sense for them in terms of like maximizing the profit. Like, you could use the dwelling unit factor to determine the number of units you build in a building, and that number can be studio apartments, but eliminating the dwelling unit factor will make it possible to maximize the building's floor area with the type of size the building demands. Type of size units, sorry.
Okay. I don't know if that's an old hand or a new. Ms. Viglianti?
Yeah, I have my hand raised. This I'm going out on a limb here, and I don't want to sound crazy, but is does this have a potential of, like, in the near future, um like they do in China, like you would, if you're single, you have to get a studio apartment. Like, you couldn't, if they build more apartment buildings where only single units are, would we, would single people be like forced at some point to, like, okay, you can only buy this kind of apartment, you can't get a 2-bedroom apartment, because there'll be more of those type of apartments, because it makes more sense for a developer to build like that, because he's going to make a lot more money, because he's going to have a lot more units in a building. And so when we get oversaturated with single unit apartment buildings, is the city at some point going to say, okay, well, if you're a single person, you have to live in this type of building. You can't live in a 2-bedroom. You can't rent a 2-bedroom apartment. This is just futuristic in a way, but not really, because they do it in other countries.
Understood. Yeah, we appreciate the question. The answer to that, frankly, is no. The city does not, the zoning resolution does not, and legally cannot decide who can rent what kind of apartment. I guess the only thing that we sometimes have any control over is affordability. Like, you can only get an affordable, like an income restricted unit if you prove that your income qualifies. But besides that, no, there's no rule. I don't think it's even constitutional for us and the zoning resolution to regulate you as a single person have to get, a single apartment or anything like that. That's not a rule, and nothing that is anywhere on the horizon now. So there would still be opportunity for a single person to get a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom or a 5-bedroom mansion if they can afford that kind of thing. That's great. Go for it. But that's not a rule that we have or would have anytime in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other questions. One more. Dawn?
I have a question. Yeah, so it sounds like this smaller unit allowance is just going to allow for more units, more people in buildings that are now also just going to be bigger. So more people all around. Has anyone in the city looked at what this means for resources that are not changing in the same way, as in same transportation, more people? Like, a lot of these things are remaining the same, the neighborhoods are remaining the same, but then we're oversaturating them. So, like, my question is, has that been looked at area by area? Schools as well.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Well, the first thing I do want to say is when it comes to the small and shared apartments, right, going back to what you said earlier and kind of thinking through the arithmetic of it, let's say I build a 4-unit building, right? Because of the unit factor right now, I can't build 4 small studios, right? Even though those might be affordable and might be kind of like the demographic that wants to live in that neighborhood. I would have to build, in theory, this isn't, perfect, but it's something like, 2 small studios and then 2 3-bedroom apartments, right? What we see in a lot of places is a lot of times those 3-bedroom apartments are taken up by 3 separate individuals who would love to live alone if they had the opportunity, but there aren't enough small apartments out there. So let's take that example, 2 studios and then 2 3-bedroom apartments, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 8 individuals. If we allow 8 studios in that building instead, it's still 8 individuals, right? So it's not necessarily an added load. Understood, though, your question. And you're right. Proposal is designed to allow more housing, which could allow more people to live in places. When it comes to resources and infrastructure, the department completed what is the largest environmental impact study that we've ever done. It's thousands of pages long. It is all public, and we'd be happy to send it to you. And what it found is that even though infrastructure in a lot of neighborhoods is insufficient, that's definitely a reality, and we certainly are not denying that in any way. I live in the city. I'm frustrated with sometimes the sewer system and transportation as well. I'm all part of this. And yet, what it looked at, and Talia, or correct me if I'm wrong, is the difference between today's situation and what is likely to happen if CHO is passed in its current form. And what it found is that in many cases, there will be very little impact on those things that make things worse than they are today, right? And part of the reason for that is because this is a proposal designed to spread development out equitably across the city rather than inundating any specific area with a ton of new towers, And so that's why we found in neighborhoods that, this is actually something that will not substantially actually increase the load or increase the difficulties that are already existing. Understood that a lot of times the infrastructure is insufficient as it stands, but when we're looking at just the proposal in front of us, what the environmental impact statement found is that there's usually mitigable impacts or no impacts, depending on the situation, between what's there now and what would be there in the future if this were to pass. I'd be happy to send that information, and regardless, as I've said throughout, we'd love to hear your response anyway.
All right.
In the recommendation.
That was Dawn, right? And lower your hand. You guys
Oh yeah, thank you. I'll just add, and not a question, that as the buildings have come up, that has not been what we've observed in terms of the resources and how they've been used and overcrowded. But I'll read the impact report. So thank you for answering my question.
Yes, the impact report should have been emailed to you as well. It's the part of the four document package that should have been attached to the invitation that you received. I think the PDF is titled EIS, so it'd be there. Right, Mr. Price. Thank you. Mr. Price lowered his hand. I'm seeing.
No, sorry.
Oh, okay.
So my question is, again, it's another topic now. It's relatively short. What's the timeline for all of this? So when is it expected, should this pass, that buildings would start getting developed and things would get underway in terms of housing in I guess, throughout the city? When will we start seeing this increase in residences?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Obviously, it depends on a lot of factors that are, market conditions, private property owners wanting to take advantage of things or not. Part of the environmental impact statement is taking into account a lot of those conditions and making an estimate, and actually not just an estimate, but a pretty conservative estimate, basically assuming that a lot of people actually do take advantage of these things. What our anticipation is that we'll see an average of 0.7 new units per acre over the next 15 years, right? And again, I want to repeat that, an average of 0.7 units per acre over the next 15 years, right? 15 years seems like a long time, but that's the point, right? A builder who's looking at this process right now recognizes that the city council may say no to it, and so they're not going to start, getting all their ducks in a row immediately. And even if the city council does say yes to it, they'll probably modify it in some way based on the recommendations of community boards such as yourself. So even if this does pass, which, if it were to pass, it would be probably the end of the calendar year and then wouldn't really be in effect in full until 2025. Then a developer or a builder would need to get their ducks in a row with funding. They need to, get things from a bank and all that kind of stuff. And so we anticipate it would actually be a pretty long time and that the addition would be relatively modest. right? And so that's our anticipation based on the EIS. Of course, a lot of it is outside of our control, depends on what owners actually want to do. Again, owners don't need to take advantage of everything here. In fact, we anticipate that many of them do not. But that's kind of what we're looking at some of those factors and using our, typical statistics for that and our research. That's what we anticipate is about 0.7 units per acre on average over the next 15 years.
Quick follow-up, something I always wanted to know but didn't realize I wanted to know. On how many acres is the average city block?
Good question. That's something I always wanted to know and also didn't have the interest in knowing until recently. I think it does change and it depends on Brooklyn versus Manhattan versus other places. I want to say a Brooklyn city block, like a rectangular block, I think is usually about an acre. I could try to do some rough calculations if I can. I think Manhattan, they tend to be a little bit larger. Let me see if I can do some quick math, but while I do that, feel free to move on.
I think the average Manhattan block is around 5.5 acres, to my knowledge.
Ms. Quashie?
Yes. Do you have statistics on how many of the units are going to be 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedrooms, and studio apartments in this community? What's
Again,
the planning for it?
Understood. Again, no specific numbers because it does depend on a lot of things outside our control. And again, the department is not actually building things, right? This is private developers. Although I should also say this still does apply to 100% affordable housing that's funded by, city agencies. So that's something else that's kind of important is that all our zoning regulations, the height restrictions, everything like that, 100% income restricted housing still needs to comply with that. And that's part of the reason that we're trying to do this. Actually, some of our biggest proponents in this proposal are mission driven nonprofits. But anyway, that's besides the point. We don't have specific numbers for that. I don't think off the top of my head. I could do a confirmation and check if it's hidden in or if it's kind of in the environmental impact study somewhere. And I'd be happy to get that to you. If you email, the land use chair, we can communicate and get that to you. But we do anticipate a mix for a number of reasons. We anticipate definitely smaller studios and 1 bedrooms because of the re-legalizing small and shared apartment proposal. But for the same reason, we also anticipate that a fair number of large apartments will continue to be built. Again, because the market need, right? If you're a family, you're not going to be looking at these tiny apartments. It's just not appropriate for you, right? What you're going to be looking for and what you're going to be willing to spend money on is a larger apartment that can accommodate your family. And if a developer wants to make money, what they've done in the past and what we anticipate they'll continue to do is provide some of those larger apartments if that's where, the money lies and if there's actually demand for that. We've seen a lot of demand for family-sized units. And so we anticipate that there will still be construction across the board. But on those specific numbers, I'll have to get back to you.
Thank you. Also, just to add that in the new UAP or MIH developments, there's either a requirement to match the distribution of unit sizes as proportional to the building, or supply greater than 50% of the units as two bedrooms or more. So there are some controls on unit distribution within these new affordable units.
Thank you. Seeing no additional questions, let me check the chat. All right. Well, hopefully everyone's questions were asked and answered tonight. As the meeting has been lengthy, I'm going to thank the Department of City Planning. Thank you, guys. I know we put you through the ringer tonight, but as always, you answer the call. I'm appreciative of everything, and I'll put my email in the chat, and hopefully we'll get any additional questions answered to you. They will be there at our next general board meeting at a support capacity as we try to do the vote. But hopefully the majority of those questions are answered tonight. A lot of the information is still in your possession. It's in the illustrated guide that you have. It's in the slide deck that was given to you. It's also in the EIS statement that was emailed to you. It's a lot of information, but we do have it in our possession. I do want to thank them and relieve them for the night. Appreciate you guys, David, Talia, Ina, for your patience and for, being thorough and making sure that we got everybody the opportunity to have their questions answered this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Guys, have a good night. As far as the agenda, moving on to unfinished business. Do we have any unfinished business as we recess for the summer? Seeing none. Do we have any? Oh,
I got that.
do we have any?
About that building on East 98th Street, do you hear any movement on it?
No news pertaining to that development.
And what is that building?
Excuse me, miss? Can't hear you, Miss Bennett.
Rogers and Church.
The church in Bedford, you said?
Rogers.
Rogers and Church. You're talking about the one on the corner where the road
Yes.
used to be, or yeah, we said that was going to be a commercial mixed use 6-unit building. That's the information that's there.
Okay, then there's another one block that they already broke ground on.
The other one went northern. The other one going south on Rogers, right?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
south, yeah, south on Rogers. I think they
North
pulled
side.
only demolition permits. Nothing was pulled for a build yet.
They got the green board up and they're digging.
Yeah, I got to look into that. I think I only saw demolition permits the last time I reviewed it. That was it.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right. Seeing no other unfinished business, moving on to new business. Do we have any new business? Also seeing none. I don't believe we have quorum, believe it or not, so we won't be able to vote on the meeting minutes.
Time to go to bed.
Yeah. Yeah, and moving on to adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Sorry,
Joe.
before we adjourn, real quick, just wanted to say, Chair Frey, thank you for the work you've been doing. Thank you for the time you put in. It is not unnoticed, and it is very clear that you're putting in a lot of time because this was just one 3-hour meeting. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you as well, Joan Erskine here, and also move to adjourn.
A second.
I would second the motion, and I also want to thank you for everything, Mr. Frey.
Thank you guys also,
Well done.
I'm here to support you guys in everything that we do. We vote as a block. I do encourage everyone to come to the meeting because we will be voting on this, and especially board members. And also for anyone that's not board members, now that you're more informed, to revisit or answer the survey with the newfound knowledge, right? I'd really like to color our response that we're going to send to the Department of City Planning to really truly reflect on how we feel in various areas. The for and against is there. If you're sure, I put the other topic there if you want to color your response, and I'm reviewing them all. So I'll be the one drafting that response. So if you do have any other questions, I do like for you to just revisit the survey if you haven't, or participate in the survey so that we could have a more colored response when we give our ultimate decision after the vote on June 18th. With that being said, the meeting is adjourned. Enjoy your summer. If you have any additional questions, please email me. And thank you for your participation. I hope this was informative, and you have a good night.
Good chat.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Is Nashin awake? She fall asleep?
No, I didn't. I've been here the entire time.
Sorry, yeah, I know. It was going to be one of those. You can stop the recording, and thank you.
Okay, so the recording